I was raised in the Central Valley of California, on the land of my grandparents and great-grandfather. My family moved there in the 19th century. I'm not sure how they obtained the land, but I believe it was from the Miwoks or another Native American group that lived nearby. On the site, my great-grandparents constructed a massive, custom mansion that had orchards of peaches, walnuts, and almonds, I guess. On that land, my grandparents later constructed a large ranch house. We moved onto the land when I was a teenager, into a different house next to my grandparents. As a result, we were outside a lot. I owned horses and other things. We were situated on a bluff and had a 40-acre property. The top of walnut orchards was visible from the cliff. Therefore, we would descend, particularly during the summer, and either walk or ride the horses. We would follow a single path that led directly down for over a mile, and our land stopped at the river. It's summer on the day this story takes place, and my friend and I were going to go for a walk to pass the time. This time, we generally headed east. I suggested that we head west as I had passed this ancient house last week while riding our horses with another friend, which was situated back off the road and away from the river from a distance. You could tell from the road. It's deserted. Let's go check it out, I said. Check to see if anything interesting is there. We then begin to walk down there. It's a tiny, square, white wooden house with one bedroom. It is immediately followed by a huge wooden barn. It was evident that this house was most likely constructed around the turn of the century or in the 1920s. The house is old and in poor condition. It is located in a remote area. As far as you can see, all you see are orchards in every way. We were being somewhat silent as we got closer because we weren't sure whether there were any other strangers out there, since we were only two girls. We simply wanted to make sure we wouldn't run against any intimidating men down there. To make sure no one was there, we made a sort of roundabout around this house and the barn. And as we did it, we were silent. This barn is enormous. Big barn, big barn. It was as big as a 2-story structure, yet it didn't have a second level. The rafters were simply very high. They slid open the barn doors. The distance between the back wall of the house and the back wall of the barn was most likely 5 or 6 feet. The barn was also completely undamaged. Nothing was wrong with it. That thing was solid. It was. However, half of the house's walls were gone, leaving only one half of the structure intact. It had been struck by trees. There were leaves and branches everywhere. The house's back wall and right side were still standing, but the front portion was still intact. Although the walls were gone, the footing was still somewhat visible. Only 3/4 of the wall remains intact. While we were circling the combination known as there, we went around to the back of this barn. 20 to 30 feet from the barn is an old tractor that is entirely covered in dry grass and weeds. We are facing these barn doors from behind. As we examine it, it is evident that it is no longer in use. It was late in the afternoon. The sun was shining through, and there were cobwebs from ceiling to floor and dust particles floating in the air. There is a very thin layer of dust covering everything. This barn is obviously abandoned. There was something like a workbench with random items that people no longer utilized on the right side of the barn. Cans, bottles, old tools, and suitcases. There wasn't a lot of goods, but what was there wasn't really worth anything. There were large railroad ties, those huge wooden railroad ties, on the barn's left side. 20 or 30 of them most likely butted up. It was approximately around 15 feet long and 4 feet high. Before they had been there for years and years and years, they were simply stacked haphazardly. They were covered with dust, hay, and cobwebs, and bits of wire and barrel hoops were placed on top of them. In the deserted field surrounding us, there may have once been a grape vineyard. There was a lot of vintage orchard equipment because they also had peach orchards down there. Hay bales that had come apart and were simply heaped up along the entire back wall of the barn, followed by wooden objects, metal rings, and wire in the far left corner. It was around 5 feet high, by the house's width. Over the course of 10 or 20 years, tons of bales of hay must have come apart, and it's simply lying there, covered with cobwebs and dust. We're sort of slicing through some cobwebs as we go through, and I'm terrified of spiders. The thought, oh, I don't want to see any spiders, makes me laugh. And we move about within. We're searching in the hopes of seeing an antique, fascinating tool, bottle, or other item. Interesting, enjoyable, vintage, antique, and so forth to bring along. We move about the space. Nothing of interest is visible to us. And we leave again. We circle the house to the front. Numerous old, abandoned washers and dryers, most likely from the 1950s, are on the front porch. We entered what was formerly a wall as we entered the main section of this little, square house, but the wall had vanished. Like the base and the lower portion of the wall, it was just 2 feet high. My companion enters the home, and since there isn't a wall between it and the house, as we enter, we would both be staring at the rear wall of the barn if we were positioned in the exact middle of this perfect square. The entire home was gone, but there is a kitchen on the left that you may enter, and you can continue down that side. There was also a little bedroom, and I remained in the middle of the home, staring at what was likely the living room, which had no walls. On the ground lay a mass of nothing but trash. Additionally, there are branches and leaves. The remaining rooms are merely dungeons. This pile of things is a little jumbled. My friend then moves to the front. She is searching the other rooms. Additionally, as I'm searching through this pile and sort of pushing stuff around with a stick to see what's within, I notice this staff, similar to a walking stick. It is most likely 4 or 5 feet in length. It is also finely crafted. Every square inch of it is carved by Derek. The carving is elaborate and highly detailed. I'm looking at it, squinting, and prodding it with a stick, wondering, what is that? In a state of fear, my pal calls. She is in the front section of the home, so I kind of hustled back there after being startled. She was frightened by a lizard or something. Come here, I said. The contents of this mound must be seen. It's a cool thing that we then strolled back to my position at this pile. Additionally, the distance between us and the barn's rear wall is probably 5 or 6 feet, that if you've ever been in an old barn or something like an old wooden fence, you can see a tiny bit of light through the wood's fissures. Through the wood's fractures, you can see. When I reach that pile, I notice that there is a staff member present. Nothing is there as I begin to poke around in the pile. It isn't present. What did you see? She asks. There was a stick, I added, and just as I opened my mouth to discuss it, a tremendous noise erupted from within the barn. It sounded as though a freight train had been dropped inside the barn. Whatever was behind the barn's doors was causing the ground to tremble and sound louder than a truck or like a train. Whatever it was really loud. You could hear the wood flying, the barrel rings flying, the railroad ties flying, the hay scattering, and the sound of barrels entering the barn so quickly and aggressively the ground and walls were trembling. The air was incredibly loud, and everything in the room was moving. Whatever it was then struck the rear wall of that barn directly in front of us, eye level, and you could hear the breathing and a guttural growl coming from the opposite side of the wall, and I can't even begin to convey how terribly loud this sound was. It wasn't a human or a car. Both of us are frozen, gazing between the wall's slats at this wall. As we stare at the wall, we begin to slowly make our way to the right and leave this house. You can see that there is something on the other side of the wall as we move, that it's visible to you. The wood slats are sort of letting dust in through those slats. You could see eyes, but the shape was obscured. You could see something on the other side of the wall. It was pitch black. The eyes first appeared yellowish, then somewhat red. We began to carefully make our way out of the home, facing the wall, keeping our gaze fixed on this wall. It is still following us and breathing. On the opposite side of the wall, you could hear movement. Upon approaching a clearing, we start sprinting. We start running without turning around. Before one of us physically collapses on the ground from running so fast, we must have run 3/4 of a mile. We glance at one another, check our surroundings, and make sure nothing is following us. We exchange glances, wondering what on earth just transpired, and we begin to relive and deny what we heard and saw. We were both shocked by what had recently transpired when we first spoke. This can't be what I thought it was you wanted to say. My friend Jennifer begins to complete my words as I begin to describe what I seen. For her, I'm doing the same. Did you see the skin, for example? It appeared to be leather. Have you noticed his eyes? The eyes were crimson indeed. What did we see? What made that sound so loud? How could that barn have survived? Another guy, who is like a younger brother to me, approaches us while we are sitting there regaining our breath because he was heading down to the river to go fishing. "What are you guys doing?" he asks. We explain what transpired. "You guys are full of crap," he says. "Nothing is there. You people are insane." "Dude, I'm not lying to you," I say. "I've never told you lies. I'm serious." "All right," he said, "then show me." We rise and begin our journey back there. I said, "I'm not going in there again, but I'll walk back there. I will never return there." We return to the barn by walking back over there and, taking a wide berth around it. "I just want to see what," I said. "If you go into that barn, you'll see that it's completely destroyed." We reach the very back, and from a distance, I can see the inside of the barn, which appears to be exactly as it was when we first arrived. The ceiling still has cobwebs hanging on it. Everything is in the same location. There has been no movement, no askew dust anywhere. It's the same thing. "Hey, go over there in that house and go look in that pile over there and see if there's a long stick in that," I tell him. He's dumb, and I sent him in there like a test subject. When he entered, he thought, "There's nothing in here. This place is filled with rubbish. There are trash, leaves, and old cans. And this place is empty. What are you discussing?" Later that night, I return and begin sketching. I'm sketching as if I've never seen anything like the pictures on that stick, but I can't imagine what they were. Years later, and for days after that, Jennifer and I discussed that. All I can say about what we witnessed is that it was a demon. I find it difficult to share this experience with others since they won't believe you, but I wasn't exposed to horror stories at the time. I grew up in a deeply religious household. We were not permitted to discuss or participate in such activities. For example, it was only a part of my experience and not a part of my reality. IT was not what I was searching for. I didn't anticipate it at all, but what I observed is known to me, and that's when I started to seriously consider what else might be out there. Since then, as an adult, I have been unable to articulate what I have heard and seen. I'm now curious to see what else is out there because of it. Beyond, flesh and bone, there's another thing that occurs in our universe. Something else is out there. Something else. I've been interested in reading and researching in an attempt to understand, but I'm also a little scared of learning the specifics of what I saw. Very few things genuinely frighten me now that day has passed. Nearly everything else is physical. You can fight your way out of it. There was no fighting. You knew you were completely powerless. To this, that terrified me to my core.